The late afternoon sun bled across the hills of Harlan Falls like a wound that refused to close. The kind of light that turned everything golden and warm from a distance, but did nothing for the cold settling into the bones of anyone standing still too long. October in Montana had teeth, and today it was biting early. The Black Ridge Riders Clubhouse sat at the end of Tanner Road, a converted warehouse with steel doors and blacked-out windows surrounded by a gravel lot where chrome and iron gleamed in neat rows. The building had no sign. It didn't need one. Everyone in Harlan Falls knew what it was, and most knew enough to keep walking. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of motor oil, old leather cigarette smoke baked into the wood-paneled walls over 2 decades, and the sharp bitterness of black coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Classic rock thumped from a jukebox in the corner, the kind of machine that still took quarters and still played Lynyrd Skynyrd like it was 1977. Pool balls cracked against each other on a table with faded green felt. Beer bottles clinked. Voices rumbled low the way men talk when they have nowhere else to be and no one waiting at home. More than a dozen men filled the main room. Big men, scarred knuckles wrapped around pint glasses, faded tattoos crawling up forearms and disappearing under leather vests heavy with patches earned over years of loyalty, loss, and road. They were mechanics and veterans, former inmates and former husbands, fathers who had failed and loners who had stopped trying. Men the town whispered about at church but never confronted at the gas station. Every head turned when the steel door creaked open. The music didn't stop, but it might as well have. Conversations died in mid-sentence. A pool cue froze in mid-strike. Boone, a giant of a man with a red beard that reached his chest and arms thick as railroad ties, set his beer down slowly. Standing in the doorway was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 12. Drowning in a faded gray hoodie 2 sizes too large, the sleeves swallowing his hands. Jeans patched at both knees with different colored fabric like someone had grabbed whatever was closest. Sneakers held together with silver duct tape wrapped so many times it had become part of the shoe itself. His dark brown hair fell across his forehead in unwashed tangles, partially hiding eyes that had no business looking that old in a face that young. And across his left cheek, climbing up around his eye socket, spreading like a dark storm cloud against pale skin, was a bruise. Purple at the center, yellowing at the edges. The kind that didn't come from falling off a bike or catching an elbow during recess. The kind that came from a fist. A few bikers exchanged glances. Someone in the back let out a low chuckle. "Wrong address, kid." The boy didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't run. He stepped fully inside and let the heavy door swing shut behind him with a thud that echoed off the concrete floor. His hands stayed buried in his pockets. His shoulders were hunched, but not from cold. From habit. From years of making himself smaller. "I'm looking for work." His voice was quiet but clear. It cut through the room like a blade through smoke. "After school, I can sweep floors, wash bikes, clean tools, organize the shop. Whatever you need, I'm good at it. I won't cause trouble." He said it all in one breath, like he'd rehearsed it on the walk over. Like he'd stood outside that door for 10 minutes, running the words through his head, knowing he'd only get one chance, and one chance was all he'd ever gotten at anything. The laughter came then louder. Boone slapped the bar top hard enough to rattle the bottles. "You hear that boy's kid wants to earn his patch already." A few others shook their heads, grinning, but one man in the room wasn't laughing. Cole Braddock sat in the corner booth with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. 45 years old, former Marine, 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, shaved head and a jagged scar running from behind his left ear down to his collarbone, a souvenir from a roadside explosion outside Kandahar that killed 2 men sitting 3 feet from him. He'd carried their dog tags home in his pocket and never took them off his keychain. Cole was the club's road captain. He planned the rides, settled the disputes, and spoke last in every meeting, because when he spoke, every man in the room shut up and listened. He had pulled brothers from burning wreckage. He had held dying friends in the Afghan dust and whispered lies about how everything was going to be fine. And he had learned in the blood and silence of those moments how to read people the way other men read road signs. He saw something in this boy's eyes that stopped his coffee halfway to his mouth. Determination, wrapped tight in shame, wrapped tighter in fear. The kind of composure that only comes from learning very young that showing weakness invites pain. Cole had seen that look before. In the mirror, 35 years ago. He set the cup down and stood slowly. His boots were heavy on the stained concrete. The room felt his movement before they heard it, and the laughter died. "What's your name, kid?" Marcus Webb." "You live around here, Marcus Webb." A small nod. "Maple Street, the blue house with the chain-link fence and the porch that leans." Cole knew that house. Every longtime resident of Harlan Falls knew it, even if they'd trained themselves to look the other way when they drove past. It was a foster placement, run by a man named Dale Fenner. Big Loud kept to himself, collected state checks, and rotated kids through like inventory. Children came and went from that house the way stray dogs came and went from the shelter 2 towns over. Quietly, without ceremony, without anyone asking where they'd gone. "How old are you?" 12, 13 in February. Cole stepped closer. Marcus's shoulders drew up half an inch, an involuntary flinch disguised as a shift in posture. But he didn't step back. He didn't drop his eyes. That told Cole everything he needed to know. "That's a hell of a bruise." Marcus's jaw tightened. The mask went on smooth and practiced. "Fell off my skateboard." "You ride that skateboard to school?" "Sometimes, Where'd you fall? Sidewalk, driveway, parking lot?" Marcus's gaze dropped for just a fraction of a second. Calculating. Weighing truth against consequence, the way a prisoner weighs escape against punishment. "Does it matter?" "Yeah," Cole said, and his voice dropped to something low and steady, a frequency that bypassed defenses and landed somewhere close to the bone. "It matters a lot." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Every biker in the room had gone still. They were pretending to look at phones, stare at the television, study their drinks. But every ear was tuned to that conversation the way a hunting dog tunes to movement in the brush. Cole made a decision, the kind that doesn't feel like a choice, the kind that feels like the only possible response when the universe puts something broken directly in your path. "Tell you what, I need to check the shop out back, see what kind of work we actually have. You wait here, don't touch anything, just sit." He pointed to an old leather couch near the front window. Cracked and worn stuffing leaking from one arm, like tired memories escaping a place they'd been trapped too long. Springs visible through the cushion, the kind of furniture that had given up trying to be anything other than what it was. Marcus walked to it and sat down, straight-backed, hands still in his pockets, eyes fixed on the scuffed floor between his taped-up sneakers. He didn't ask how long. He didn't fidget. He sat the way someone sits who has learned that stillness is survival. Cole didn't go to the shop. He stepped outside into the cold October air, pulled his phone from his vest pocket, and dialed a number he hadn't used in over 3 years. A Marine brother from his second tour. A man named Hargrove, who had left the Corps, gotten a degree in criminal justice, and now worked as a detective in the county sheriff's office. The phone rang twice. "Braddock, been a while. I need a favor, and I need it quiet." "And what kind of quiet?" "The kind where a 12-year-old boy walks into my clubhouse looking like he went 3 rounds with a grown man, and his foster father lives in that blue house on Maple Street that everyone in this town pretends doesn't exist." Silence on the other end. Then Dale Fenner. "You know him. His name's come up, never enough to move on. Give me what you've got." Cole gave him everything. The bruise, the boy's demeanor, the address, the way Marcus had flinched when Cole stepped too close, the way his eyes had flickered when asked about the bruise. Hargrove listened without interrupting the way good investigators do. "I'll start pulling records," Hargrove said. "But Cole, you know how this works. Unless the kid talks, or unless we catch Fenner in the act, CP moves like molasses, especially in a town this size with a department this underfunded. Then we build the case ourselves. I'll document everything, carefully by the book. Nothing that a defense attorney can throw out." "Understood." "And Cole, don't do anything stupid." Cole looked back at the clubhouse door. Through the narrow window, he could see Marcus still sitting exactly where he'd left him. Hadn't moved an inch. "I'm going to give that kid a job," Cole said. "And I'm going to make sure he has a reason to keep coming back. Whatever happens next, he needs to know there's somewhere safe." He hung up and stood in the cold for another minute, watching his breath cloud the air. Then he went back inside. 2 hours had passed. The clubhouse had shifted through its evening rhythms. Men came and went. The jukebox cycled through its catalog. Someone in the kitchen heated up leftover chili. And through all of it, Marcus Webb sat on that broken couch and didn't move. Lorraine emerged from the back kitchen. She was 58 years old, built like a woman who had spent her whole life feeding people who forgot to feed themselves, with silver-streaked hair pinned up and reading glasses perpetually pushed onto her forehead. She had cooked for the Black Ridge Riders every weekend for 17 years. She knew their allergies, their ulcers, their blood sugar problems, and their heartbreaks. She was not an official member of anything, but every man in that clubhouse would have walked through fire for her, and she knew it. She carried a plate to the couch without a word. Thick ham and cheese sandwich on fresh bread, a pile of kettle chips, a cold can of Coca-Cola. She set it on the armrest beside Marcus, gave his shoulder the gentlest squeeze, and walked away without looking back. Marcus stared at the food for almost 10 minutes. He stared at it the way a stray animal stares at an outstretched hand, wanting desperately to trust it, terrified of the consequences. His fingers twitched inside his pockets. His stomach, clearly empty, made a sound he tried to cover with a cough. But still he waited, as if at any moment someone would snatch it away or laugh or say it wasn't really for him. Finally, he reached for the sandwich. Small, careful bites, chewing slowly, savoring every one. This was a boy who had learned, perhaps from the very beginning of his life, that nothing good lasted, that food could be taken, that kindness was a trap, that the safest way to experience anything pleasant was to do it quietly, quickly, and without drawing attention. He finished everything, every chip, every drop of Coke. Then he folded the napkin neatly and placed it on the empty plate. When Cole came back in, Marcus was exactly where he'd been. The plate was clean. "All right, Marcus," Cole said, pulling up a metal folding chair and sitting so they were eye to eye. "We've got work, sweeping, organizing tools, washing bikes, basic stuff, $10 an hour. 3 days a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, 2 hours after school. You show up on time, you work hard, you don't steal, and you never lie to us. Can you handle that?" For the first time since walking through that door, something shifted in the boy's face. His eyes widened just a fraction. Not much, just enough. Like a crack forming in a wall that had been built brick by brick over 12 years. Through that crack, something fragile and almost extinct peeked through. Hope. "Yes, sir." "Good. Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Don't be late." Marcus stood. He nodded once, a sharp, serious gesture that belonged on a man 3 times his age. He walked to the door, pulled it open, and stepped into the cold. "Marcus." The boy turned. Cole held his gaze. That bruise didn't come from any skateboard. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the precision of a man who had spent his life in situations where the difference between a question and a statement was the difference between life and death. Marcus's face went carefully blank. The mask slid back into place with the speed and efficiency of a machine designed for exactly that purpose. "Tuesday," Cole said, 4 o'clock. The door closed softly behind the boy. The clubhouse exhaled. Boone spoke first. "You serious, Braddock, hiring a kid?" Cole stood at the window watching the small figure in the oversized hoodie disappear down the darkening street. Shoulders hunched, head down, walking toward a house that no child should have to call home. "That," Cole said quietly, "was a kid throwing out a lifeline in the only way he knew how, and we're going to grab it." No one argued, not even Boone, because every man in that room, somewhere beneath the leather and the scars and the years of hard road, recognized something in that boy, something they had once been, something the world had beaten down but never quite managed to kill. And maybe, just maybe, saving him was the way they finally saved themselves. That night, Cole sat alone at the clubhouse bar long after everyone else had gone home. The building creaked around him, settling into its bones the way old structures do when the heat kicks off and the cold starts winning. He stared at his phone, at the calendar. Tuesday was 2 days away. 2 days felt like a lifetime when you knew what was waiting for a kid behind a closed door. He pulled up the contacts on his phone and scrolled to Hargrove's name. His thumb hovered. Then he set the phone down and poured himself a coffee instead. Black, no sugar. The way the Marines had taught him to drink it, because in the desert there was no sugar, and learning to want things you couldn't have was just another way of letting the enemy win. He thought about the boy's face, the bruise, The way Marcus had said, "Does it matter?" Not with defiance, not with anger, with genuine curiosity, as if the idea that someone might care about the origin of his pain was a foreign concept, a language he had never been taught to speak. Cole had known men like that in the Corps, men who had grown up in houses where pain was the weather, unpredictable but inevitable, and the only survival strategy was to stop expecting it to be any other way. Some of those men became the best soldiers he ever served with. Fearless not because they didn't understand danger, but because they had been living in danger since birth, and combat was just the adult version of what they'd always known. And some of those men didn't make it, not because of bullets or bombs, because the thing that had been broken in them since childhood finally finished breaking in a quiet room on a quiet night when the world got too still and the memories got too loud. Cole Braddock had been one of those men, once, before the Marines gave him structure, before the brotherhood of the club gave him purpose, before he learned that strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about knowing you were broken and getting up anyway. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and locked the clubhouse door behind him. The stars over Harlan Falls were sharp and cold, the kind of sky that makes you feel very small and very temporary. He stood in the parking lot for a long moment, looking at nothing, thinking about everything. Then he went home to wait for Tuesday. Tuesday arrived under a sky the color of wet concrete. Marcus was waiting outside the clubhouse at 3:50, 10 minutes early, shifting his weight from one taped sneaker to the other, hands jammed in his hoodie pockets, breath coming in small white clouds. Cole opened the door before he could knock. "Early, good start. Come on." He led Marcus through the main room, quieter now in the afternoon, and out through a heavy fire door into the garage. The space opened up wide and clean, or at least cleaner than the clubhouse. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. 5 motorcycles sat in a gleaming row chrome, catching the light like mirrors. Tools hung in precise order on pegboard walls, each outline traced in marker, so every wrench and socket had a home. The air smelled of gasoline, rubber solvent, and something Marcus couldn't name but would later learn to recognize as the smell of purpose. "This is Whit." Whitfield Sayers stood up from behind a Harley Softail, wiping his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth. Late 50s, lean and wiry, with salt and pepper hair, pulled back in a short ponytail, and permanent stains embedded in the creases of his fingers. He'd been an Army medic, 2 tours in Iraq, and had come home with skills that translated into fixing anything mechanical with the same instinct he'd once used to patch shrapnel wounds. The guys called him Whit. He could diagnose an engine problem from 20 feet away by sound alone. "Kid's on cleanup and organization," Cole told him. "Show him what needs doing." Whit looked Marcus up and down with the measured gaze of a man accustomed to rapid triage, not judging, assessing. He reached behind him without looking and produced a push broom. "Start there," he said, pointing to the far corner. "Work your way toward me. Every corner, under every bench. If I can see dust when you're done, you start over." Marcus took the broom and went to work. He attacked that floor like it was the most important task in the history of human civilization. Every corner, every crack in the concrete, under workbenches, behind tool chests, around the base of the motorcycle lift. He swept with a focus and precision that made Whit stop what he was doing and watch from behind his reading glasses. This wasn't a kid doing chores. This was a kid proving he deserved to be there. Every stroke of that broom was an argument: I am useful. I am worth keeping. "Please don't send me away." After an hour, Whit called him over to the main workbench. "You know anything about engines?" "No, sir." "Want to?" The shift was instant, like a light coming on behind Marcus's eyes, a sudden electric aliveness that hadn't been there a moment before. "Yes." Whit pulled out a large plastic bin from under the bench. Inside was a chaos of mixed bolts, washers, nuts, gaskets, and small engine parts, all jumbled together like a metal jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box. "Sort these. Group by size and type. Think you can handle it?" Marcus knelt on the concrete floor and went to work. His fingers moved with careful deliberation, turning each piece, examining it, placing it in the correct row with the precision of a jeweler sorting stones. 20 minutes later, Whit walked over and stopped short. The parts were laid out in perfect rows, grouped not just by size but by function. Bolts with bolts, washers with washers, but also organized by metric and standard, by thread pitch, by head type. The kid had figured out a system Whit himself hadn't taught him. "You've got steady hands," Whit said, voice carrying something it hadn't carried a moment before. "Respect." And a sharp eye. Marcus looked up. For just a second, the mask slipped. Behind it was a boy. Just a boy. Desperate to be seen for something other than a problem. "My mom used to let me help in the garage before." The word hung in the air. Before, a word that divided Marcus Webb's life into two territories, one remembered, one endured. Whit didn't push. He'd learned in combat hospitals that some stories only come out when they're ready, and forcing them did more harm than the wound itself. "Well," he said, "you keep showing up like this, and I'll teach you the basics. How an engine breathes, how to take one apart and put it back together, how every piece trusts every other piece to do its job. Might come in handy someday." "Really? Really?" The smile that crossed Marcus's face lasted only a second. But Whit saw it, and he understood that in that second, a 12-year-old boy experienced something he might never have experienced before. The belief that he was capable of something beautiful. The other club members began to notice Marcus too, not just as the kid who swept the garage, but as a presence. A quiet, steady force that changed the energy of the room simply by being in it. Boone, who had laughed loudest that first day, started leaving motorcycle magazines on the workbench with pages bookmarked at engine diagrams. He never said anything about it. He didn't have to. A member named Dawson, who ran a body shop on the edge of town, brought in a set of used work gloves that happened to be exactly Marcus's size. Left them on top of the toolbox with no note. Marcus put them on without a word and wore them every shift from then on. Even the guys who were in and out, the part-time members, the associates, the hangers-on, they started cleaning up their language when Marcus was in the garage. Not because anyone told them to, because something about the boy's quiet dignity made profanity feel small, made carelessness feel like an insult to the seriousness with which he approached every task. One Saturday, Marcus finished organizing the bolt bin and looked up to find Whit standing behind him with a small blue toolbox, brand new, with a white label on the front that read Marcus in neat block letters. "Every mechanic needs his own kit," Whit said. "Consider it an advance on future wages." Marcus opened the box. Inside were basics: a set of combination wrenches, a ratchet with sockets, screwdrivers flat and Phillips, pliers, a small flashlight. Nothing expensive, everything essential. He ran his fingers over the tools the way someone else might touch a photograph of a person they loved. "Nobody ever gave me anything like this. Nobody ever earned it the way you have." Marcus closed the box and held it against his chest, and for just a moment, his shoulders relaxed. The permanent hunch eased. The armor he wore like a second skin loosened by a single fraction. And in that fraction, Whit glimpsed the boy Marcus might have been if the world had treated him differently. Curious, eager, open. Then the moment passed and the armor came back, because armor always comes back when the danger hasn't gone away. But the bruises didn't stop. A split lip appeared one Thursday. Marcus said he'd bitten it eating an apple. A dark ring of fingerprints circled his left wrist the following Tuesday, visible when his sleeve rode up while reaching for a socket wrench. He yanked the sleeve down fast, but not fast enough. Another foster kid was roughhousing, he said. His eyes were on the floor when he said it. The club watched. They documented. Cole took photos with his phone at angles Marcus couldn't see. Grizzly carried a small spiral notebook in his vest pocket and wrote down every mark, every excuse, every date. Lorraine packed extra food into a canvas bag she'd given Marcus for the walk-home sandwiches: apples, protein bars, a thermos of soup when the weather turned bitter. Marcus never refused. He never said thank you out loud either. He just tucked the bag against his chest like contraband, precious and dangerous in equal measure. Then on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into Marcus's employment, the garage door exploded inward. The bang shook the walls, tools rattled on pegboards. Every man in the space stopped what he was doing and turned. Dale Fenner stood in the doorway. 6'3", heavy guts straining against a stained flannel shirt, face red from liquor and fury, the blood vessels in his nose telling a story of decades of hard drinking. His eyes were small and mean, the eyes of a man who had learned that size and volume could substitute for every quality he lacked. "Where's the damn kid?" His gaze swept the room like a searchlight and locked onto Marcus, who had gone completely still beside Whit at the workbench. The color drained from the boy's face. His hands, which had been confidently holding a torque wrench moments ago, began to tremble. Whit stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just forward. A wall of quiet authority, grease rag still in one hand. "Can I help you? You can get the hell out of my way." Dale's voice was a snarl, wet and thick. "That's my foster boy, and this little playdate is over. He's got chores at home he hasn't done." Marcus's breathing went shallow, rapid, the sound of a small animal hearing a predator's footstep. Cole appeared from the office hallway like a shadow stepping into light. Unhurried, deliberate, his face showed nothing. His eyes showed everything. Behind him, Boone materialized. Then two more. They didn't arrange themselves. They just occupied space the way large men in leather naturally occupy space when something in the air tells them to. "Mr. Fenner," Cole said. His voice was level conversational, the way a blade is flat before it turns. "Marcus's shift ends at 6. It's 5:20. He'll be home when he's done." "I don't give a damn about your schedule." Dale jabbed a finger toward the boy. "I didn't sign off on him working here. He's got responsibilities at home." "What kind of responsibilities?" "That's between me and him." Was it? Cole took one step forward, just one. But the step carried the weight of 3 combat tours and a lifetime of facing down men far more dangerous than a drunk bully in a flannel shirt. Because he keeps showing up here with new marks, split lips, finger bruises on his arms. And from what I understand, his caseworker hasn't been by in over 2 years. So I'm curious, what exactly are these responsibilities you need him home for? The garage went silent. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the confrontation below. Dale's fists clenched. The veins in his neck thickened. He looked at the men around him, doing the arithmetic of violence that cowards always do, calculating odds, measuring exits, weighing his rage against the very real possibility of getting beaten into the concrete floor. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice dropping from a shout to a mutter. "Kids fall. They're clumsy. That's what kids do. And if he'd just listened to what he's told..." He caught himself too late. "If he'd just listened what?" Cole pressed. "One more step. What happens when he doesn't listen?" Dale's eyes darted to the door behind him. The exit. The escape route. He pointed at Marcus without looking at him. "You home 1 hour. Don't make me come back here." He turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to knock a wrench off its pegboard hook. It clattered on the concrete like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his hands. They were shaking so badly the torque wrench he was still holding rattled against the workbench. Whit crouched beside him, slowly, the way you approach an injured bird. "You're okay, kid. He's gone." "I should go." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "If I'm late..." "Not yet," Cole said. He already had his phone out. "Grizzly, get here, now." 20 minutes later, Grizzly walked Marcus most of the way home while Boone followed on his Harley engine, rumbling low, circling the block with the patient menace of a shark. They stopped one house away from the blue house. Through the front window, Dale was visible, pacing a bottle in one hand, shouting into a phone with the other. Grizzly put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, gently, like handling glass. "You don't have to go in there tonight." "I do." The words came flat, rehearsed, the voice of someone who had run this calculation 1,000 times and always arrived at the same answer. "If I don't show up, he calls the caseworker. Says I ran, then it's a group home. I've been in 3, they're worse." "How do you know they're worse?" "Because after the 4th placement, they stop trying. You just sit there until you age out." Marcus gave a small shrug. The kind of shrug that carries the weight of an entire childhood's worth of disappointment packed into a single motion. A gesture so practiced, so perfected in its casualness, that it broke Grizzly's heart more completely than tears ever could. "Thanks for the job," Marcus said quietly. "It's been really good." He walked to the door alone. Grizzly watched him go up the porch steps, watched him open the door, watched the darkness swallow him whole when it closed. The porch light stayed off. Grizzly called Cole before he'd taken 2 steps back toward the street. "We're out of time, brother. That man is going to hurt him bad soon. I can feel it." "I know. Meet me at Lorraine's, 30 minutes. Lorraine's diner sat on Main Street, a block from the courthouse, warm and dimly lit, even at 9 o'clock on a weeknight. It smelled of fresh coffee, bacon grease, and the particular brand of comfort that only exists in places where the same woman has been cooking the same food for the same people for more than a decade. Lorraine poured coffee before anyone asked. She set 3 mugs on the corner booth table, slid in beside Grizzly, and looked at Cole. How bad? Bad enough that we need to move. Hargrove is building the CPS case, but bureaucracy takes time we don't have. We need evidence, hard evidence. Dates, photos, medical records if we can find them. Something a judge can't ignore. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Then she disappeared into the back office and returned carrying an old cardboard file box with employee records 2008 to 2015 written in faded marker on the side. I've been cleaning out old files, she said, setting the box on the table. Found something last year I didn't know what to do with. She pulled out a thin manila folder. The tab read Jesse Webb in blue ink. Cole opened it. Inside was a faded employment record. Name Jessica Marie Webb, position waitress. Start date March 2013. The notes described an excellent worker, reliable, cheerful, always early, single mother, infant son. Then in June 2013, the entry simply stopped. No 2-week notice, no phone call, no forwarding address. A final paycheck sat uncashed. A note in Lorraine's handwriting at the bottom, called police June 20th, 2013. No follow-up. Case closed. Tucked inside the folder was a Polaroid photograph, its edges soft and curling with age. A young woman barely 21 with dark brown hair and eyes that Cole recognized instantly because he had been looking into the exact same eyes 3 days a week for the past month. She was holding an infant against her chest, smiling at the camera with the particular radiance of someone who has discovered the single thing in the world that makes everything else bearable. On the back, in careful handwriting, Marcus 4 months. My whole heart. Cole stared at the photograph until the faces blurred. She was sweet, Lorraine said, her voice thick. So young. She worked doubles to pay for formula and diapers. Talked about her baby nonstop. Marcus this, Marcus that. He was her entire world. She paused. And then one day she just didn't show up. I called the next day and the next and the next. Nothing. Called the police. They said single mothers sometimes just take off. Case closed inside a week. Nobody checked on the baby. Grizzly's voice was barely controlled. Nobody asked. A few months later, I heard some man had the infant, said he was a family friend, that the mother had dropped the baby off and left town. Dale Fenner, Cole said. Lorraine nodded. I didn't put it together then. Different county, different name maybe. But when that boy walked into your clubhouse and you told me his name was Marcus Webb, I went through those old boxes until my hands shook. While Cole took photos of every page in the file, the employment record, the dates, the notes, the Polaroid. A devoted mother does not abandon her 4-month-old baby without taking a single photograph, a single diaper bag, a single thing that proves he existed. Cole said, his voice low and certain. She doesn't leave behind her last paycheck. She doesn't stop calling the only job she's ever had without a word. You think Fenner did something to her? Grizzly said. It wasn't a question. I think Jesse Webb tried to leave Dale Fenner's life, and Dale Fenner decided that wasn't going to happen. Lorraine's hand was trembling when she picked up her coffee mug. She set it down without drinking. I think about her sometimes, she said quietly. Late at night, when the diner's closed and I'm doing the books, I think about how she used to sing while she worked. Little songs, nothing fancy, just melodies she made up to keep herself going. And I think about how one day the singing just stopped, and how I called the police and they shrugged and I let it go. I let it go because it was easier than believing something terrible had happened. She looked at Cole. I failed her. We all did, Cole said. This whole town did, but we're not failing her son. Grizzly leaned forward, elbows on the table, his massive frame making the booth creak. What's the play? Hargrove needs everything we have. The employment records, the Polaroid, every photo I've taken of Marcus's injuries, every date and time Grizzly has in his notebook, the school records Hargrove is pulling, and the history of Dale Fenner moving from county to county every time someone starts asking questions. How soon can they move? Hargrove says a week, maybe less if a judge sees the full picture. A week. Grizzly's jaw tightened. A lot can happen in a week. That's why we don't leave Marcus unprotected. From now on, someone walks him to and from the clubhouse every day. Someone drives past that house every night. Boone's already been doing it, but we formalize it. Rotation. Every member takes a shift. And if Fenner tries something, Cole met his eyes, then we deal with it. But we do it right. We don't give any judge a reason to take Marcus away from us when this goes to court. Because when it goes to court, I want that boy to have a choice for the first time in his life. And I want us to be one of the options. The diner was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a truck passing on the highway outside. Cole stood and put on his jacket. I'm calling Hargrove tonight. This changes everything. This isn't just a child abuse case anymore. This might be a missing person case. Maybe worse. He looked at the Polaroid one more time. Jesse Webb's smile. Marcus's infant eyes. That boy has been living in the house of the man who may have destroyed his mother for 12 years, and nobody noticed. Grizzly's jaw clenched so hard the tendons in his neck stood out like cables. We noticed. Yeah, Cole said. We did, and now we finish it. Outside, the October wind had picked up, carrying the smell of wood smoke and approaching winter down from the mountains. Somewhere on Maple Street, in a blue house with a sagging porch, a 12-year-old boy lay in the dark, listening to the heavy footsteps of a man who had taken everything from him before he was old enough to remember what he'd lost. But he had a card in his pocket with a phone number on it. And for the first time in his life, he had people who saw him. The storm was coming. For Dale Fenner. For the truth about Jesse Webb. For all the years of silence and complicity that had allowed a monster to hide in plain sight. And when it broke, it would change everything. Not just for Marcus. For every man who had ever looked in the mirror and wondered if the broken parts of himself could still be used for something good. Cole called Hargrove at 11 that night. The detective answered on the first ring, which told Cole he'd been expecting the call. Or dreading it. I'm sending you photos, Cole said. Employment records from Lorraine Caldwell's diner. A missing woman named Jessica Marie Webb. Disappeared June 2013. Had a 4-month-old son. Nobody investigated. Nobody followed up. And now that son is 12 years old, living with Dale Fenner, covered in bruises and terrified to walk through his own front door. He heard Hargrove exhale long and slow on the other end of the line. The sound a man makes when something he suspected turns out to be worse than he feared. Send everything. I'll have it on a judge's desk by morning. How fast can you move? Depends on what I find when I start pulling Fenner's history across county lines. If this guy has been moving to avoid oversight, there's a pattern. Patterns are what judges respond to. There's more, Cole said. I think Jessie Webb didn't leave town. I think she didn't leave that house. The silence on the line lasted 5 full seconds. That's a different kind of case, Braddock. I know what kind of case it is. Then you know I need more than a feeling and a missing paycheck. You'll have it. Just start pulling the threads. Every county Fenner has lived in, every foster child he's been assigned, every complaint that got filed and then mysteriously went nowhere. And while you're at it, check if there were any other young women in his orbit who disappeared without explanation. Another long pause. Then Hargrove said, I'll need 72 hours. You've got 48. After that, I can't guarantee Marcus will still be in one piece. Cole hung up and stood at the window of his apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. Below Harlan Falls slept the shallow sleep of small towns where everybody knows everybody's business except the business that matters most. Where a woman could vanish and a child could suffer and an entire community could look the other way because looking directly at certain truths required a kind of courage that most people save for other things. He thought about Marcus in that blue house, lying in some small room, listening to Dale Fenner's footsteps, counting the seconds between each one, measuring the weight of them, learning from the rhythm whether tonight would be quiet or whether tonight would leave a new mark to explain away tomorrow. 12 years. 12 years that boy had been surviving in silence, building walls so thick and so seamless that the world looked at him and saw a quiet kid instead of a prisoner. 12 years of learning that adults were not to be trusted, that kindness was temporary, that the only reliable thing in the universe was pain. And then one afternoon, that same boy had walked into a room full of strangers and asked for work. Not help, not rescue, not pity. Work. Cole had known brave men. He had served with men who charged into gunfire and carried wounded brothers through enemy territory. He had watched men make split-second decisions that saved lives and cost them everything. But he had never seen anything braver than a bruised 12-year-old boy pushing open the door of a biker clubhouse and asking with a voice that didn't shake if there was something he could do to earn his place in a world that had given him no place at all. He turned off the light and lay down in the dark. 48 hours. The clock was running. And somewhere on Maple Street, the boy who had changed everything was trying to survive one more night. The next 48 hours moved with the slow, grinding precision of a machine built for one purpose. Detective Hargrove worked from his desk at the county sheriff's office, pulling records, making calls following a trail that Dale Fenner had spent 12 years trying to erase. And what he found made his stomach turn. Fenner had lived in 5 counties across Montana and Wyoming in the past 12 years. In each one, the pattern was identical. He would appear as a concerned community member, willing to take in a foster child. He would pass the basic background check, which in rural counties with underfunded social services departments amounted to little more than confirming he didn't have an active warrant. He would receive his monthly stipend from the state, and then quietly complaints would begin. A teacher in Billings had filed a report about a 7-year-old foster child named Tommy Dawson, who came to school with handprint bruises on his upper arms. The case was open, marked for investigation, and then closed 3 weeks later when Fenner moved to a different county and the paperwork never followed. A neighbor in Powell had called the sheriff's office about screaming from Fenner's rental house at 2 in the morning. A deputy drove by, knocked on the door, and accepted Fenner's explanation that the kid had nightmares. No follow-up, no report filed beyond a single line in the call log. In Roundup, a school nurse had documented suspicious injuries on a 9-year-old foster girl over a period of 4 months. She had filed 3 separate reports with CPS. Each time the caseworker assigned to the case attempted a home visit and found no one home. On the 4th attempt, the caseworker discovered that Fenner had moved. The child had been transferred to a different placement without notification. The case was closed due to inactivity. 5 counties, at least 4 children. A dozen red flags that never connected because the system was designed to process cases, not patterns. Each county saw one incident. No one saw the whole picture. No one put the pieces together because the pieces were scattered across filing cabinets in 5 different buildings in 5 different towns, and no one had ever thought to look at them as parts of the same puzzle. Hargrove did. He sat in his office at the county building, the overhead fluorescent casting everything in that flat institutional light that made the hours blur together, and he spread it all out on his desk at 3 in the morning. Printouts and faxes and scanned documents from 5 different counties. Phone records from CPS offices whose staff barely remembered the cases. School records retrieved from archives. Medical notes from walk-in clinics where children had been brought in with explanations that didn't match their injuries. He arranged them chronologically. A timeline of cruelty stretching back over a decade. Jessie Webb disappears. Fenner appears with her infant son. Emergency foster placement granted. First county, Tommy Dawson, age 7, handprint bruises. Teacher report filed. Case open, never investigated. Fenner moves. Second county, a girl named Brianna Mowat, 9 years old. School nurse documents injuries over 4 months. 3 CPS reports. No home visit completed. Fenner moves again. Third county, a boy named Kevin Strait, 6, emergency room visit for a dislocated shoulder. Doctor notes inconsistency in Fenner's account. Report filed. Caseworker visits, once finds nothing, closes the case. Fenner moves within 2 months. Fourth county, another boy, Ryan Pratt, 8, teacher notes extreme withdrawal and weight loss. CPS opens a case. Before the investigation progresses, Fenner transfers to Harlan Falls. Case closed due to relocation. 2022 to present. Harlan Falls, Marcus Webb. No caseworker visit in over 2 years. The pattern was so clear it made him want to put his fist through the wall. Dale Fenner was a predator who had learned to use the foster care system as both his hunting ground and his escape route. He took in vulnerable children, collected the money, abused them behind closed doors, and moved before anyone could build a case. And he'd been doing it for over a decade. Hargrove called Cole at 7 the next morning. It's worse than we thought. How much worse? Fenner's been running the same play across 5 counties, at least 4 other foster kids before Marcus. Documented injuries in 3 cases, all closed without resolution because he disappeared before anyone could act. The system didn't fail these kids, Braddock. It was never designed to catch someone like this. He's been exploiting gaps that nobody even knew existed. Cole's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles went white. What about Jesse Webb? That's where it gets darker. I pulled the missing person report from 2013. Fenner was interviewed once. Said Jesse was unstable, that she dropped the baby off at his place and said she was leaving town. The investigating officer noted no signs of foul play and closed the case within 10 days. 10 days. A 21-year-old single mother with no criminal record, no history of instability, no family to raise questions. In a small county with 2 detectives handling 60 active cases. She fell through every crack there was. Did anyone check Fenner's background at the time? No prior record. He presented as a helpful neighbor. By the time anyone might have asked harder questions, he had emergency foster placement of Marcus and had moved to his first new county. Cole stood in the clubhouse garage surrounded by machines. He understood systems built on logic and precision, where every part had a purpose and every problem had a solution. The human systems that were supposed to protect children had no such reliability. What do you need from me? Keep documenting. Every mark on that kid, every incident, photographs with timestamps. I'm presenting to a judge this afternoon. Between the pattern across counties and the active injuries on Marcus, I can get an emergency hearing fast-tracked. But the Jesse Webb angle, that's going to take longer. I need to request her dental records check for any Jane Doe cases from 2013 and get authorization to investigate properties Fenner rented at the time. How long? Weeks, maybe months. Marcus doesn't have months. I know. That's why we split it. The abuse case moves now. The homicide investigation runs parallel. Homicide. The word hung between them like smoke. That's what I said. At the clubhouse that afternoon, Marcus arrived at his usual time. 3:50, 10 minutes early, same hoodie, same taped sneakers. But today he moved stiffly, favoring his right side, and when he reached up to grab the push broom from its hook on the wall, he winced so sharply that Whit looked up from the engine he was rebuilding. You all right? Fine, just slept wrong. Whit watched the boy sweep, watched the way he held the broom with his left arm doing most of the work, while his right arm stayed pressed against his side. Watched the tiny catches in his breathing, the micro flinches that came with every twist of his torso. He didn't say anything else. Not yet. But he walked to the office and found Cole. Something's wrong. He's guarding his right side, moving like he's got cracked ribs. Cole's face went still. The particular stillness of a man making calculations that would determine the next several hours of someone's life. How bad? Bad enough that he can't lift his right arm above his shoulder. Bad enough that breathing hurts. Get him water. Keep him sitting. I'm calling Hargrove. But before Cole could dial Marcus, solve the problem himself. At 4:30, halfway through his shift, he bent down to pick up a dropped socket, and his body simply stopped cooperating. He gasped a sound that was half breath and half cry and crumpled to his knees on the concrete floor. Whit was beside him in 3 seconds. Don't move. Tell me where. Marcus's face was ashen. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His right hand pressed against his ribs, and when Whit gently lifted the edge of his hoodie, the entire right side of his torso was a landscape of purple and black, fresh bruising overlaid on older yellowing marks like geological layers telling the history of repeated violence. Jesus Christ, Whit breathed. It's not that bad, Marcus said through clenched teeth. I just need to... Sit still, don't talk. Cole appeared at the garage door. One look at the mark on the floor and his face hardened into something that had no civilian equivalent. It was the face of a man who had made decisions in combat that cost people their lives and who was now making a decision that would save one. Lorraine, he said into his phone, bring your car to the garage. Now, we're going to the hospital. No, Marcus said, and for the first time panic replaced pain in his voice. No hospital. They'll call the caseworker. They'll move me. He told me if I ever, Marcus, Cole knelt beside him, eye to eye, the same position he'd been in the first day, the same level, the same steadiness. Listen to me. Nobody is moving you anywhere except to a doctor who is going to make sure those ribs aren't broken. And then we're going to make sure Dale Fenner never touches you again. You can't promise that. Yeah, I can. Something in Cole's voice, some frequency of absolute unshakable certainty reached through 12 years of broken promises and landed in a place where Marcus still believed, despite everything, that someone in the world might actually mean what they said. Okay, he whispered. Lorraine pulled her old Buick up to the garage door 4 minutes later. Whit helped Marcus into the back seat, careful, gentle, supporting his weight, the way he'd once supported wounded soldiers being loaded onto medevac helicopters. Cole rode in front. Grizzly followed on his Harley. At the Harlan Falls Community Hospital emergency room, the triage nurse took one look at Marcus's injuries and the four large men accompanying him and made a call that bypassed every normal intake procedure. Within 20 minutes, a doctor was examining Marcus in a private room. 2 fractured ribs, deep tissue bruising across his right flank and lower back. An older fracture in his left wrist that had healed without proper medical attention. Defensive wounds on his forearms. The doctor, a woman named Sinclair, who had practiced emergency medicine for 23 years and had seen every kind of injury the human body could sustain, stepped out of the room and found Cole in the hallway. Those injuries are not accidental. The fracture pattern on the ribs is consistent with a kick or a stomp from a heavy adult. The wrist fracture is at least 6 months old and was never treated. There are multiple layers of bruising indicating repeated trauma over an extended period. I know. I'm required by law to report this to CPS. Already done. Detective Hargrove at the county sheriff's office has an active investigation. Emergency hearing is being scheduled. Dr. Sinclair studied Cole for a moment. The shaved head, the scar, the leather vest, and the expression in his eyes that had nothing to do with the stereotype she might have been expected to see, and everything to do with a man who cared so deeply about a child's safety that he was trembling with the effort of keeping his composure. He's lucky to have you, she said. He's not lucky. He's 12 years overdue for someone giving a damn. Back in the room, Marcus lay propped on pillows, rib wrap tight around his torso, an IV drip replacing fluids his dehydrated body had been missing for who knew how long. The pain medication had taken the edge off, and for the first time since Cole had known him, the boy's shoulders were not hunched. His jaw was not clenched. His hands were not balled in his pockets. He looked for one quiet moment like a child. Grizzly sat in the chair beside the bed, enormous frame folded into plastic furniture designed for people. Half his size, white beard resting on his chest, watching Marcus the way a man watches something precious and fragile. Grizzly. Yeah, kid. He broke my wrist last spring. When I spilled his beer, he stepped on it. Then he told me if I went to the hospital, he'd say I attacked him and they'd send me to juvenile. I believed him. Grizzly's hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage so deep and so tightly controlled that his entire body vibrated with it. You don't have to believe in him anymore. He said nobody would choose me, that foster kids don't get chosen. They get placed, like furniture, and when they get broken, they get thrown out. He was wrong. How do you know, Mom? Because I'm sitting here and I'm choosing you, right now, and so is every man in that clubhouse. Marcus turned his head toward the window. Outside, the sun was going down over Harlan Falls, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple. And for the first time in memory, the sunset looked like something other than the end of another day survived. My mom didn't leave me, he said suddenly, quietly, as if testing the words. What makes you say that? Because I remember things, small things, the way she smelled, like soap and coffee, the way she sang to me. I know I was a baby and people say babies don't remember, but I do. I remember her arms, and I remember that she held me like she was never going to let go. He paused, his voice dropped to something barely audible. People who hold you like that don't leave. Grizzly couldn't speak. He reached over and placed his hand, massive, scarred, calloused, from 40 years of hard living, gently over Marcus's small one. He held it, and he didn't let go. Cole stood in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. Hargrove. Fenner fractured the kid's ribs. He's in the hospital. I need that hearing moved up to tomorrow. Already on it. Judge Whitmore has the file. She's seen the medical records from tonight, the pattern across 5 counties, and the Jesse Webb disappearance. She's fast-tracking an emergency custody hearing for tomorrow morning. What about Fenner? I'm getting a warrant issued tonight. Aggravated child abuse, multiple counts. The DA wants to add more charges once we've interviewed the other foster children from previous placements. And Jesse, a pause, then. We pulled records from the property Fenner rented in 2013. The house was demolished 4 years ago, but the property is still there. I've requested authorization to search the grounds. You think she's there? I think a woman who left behind every photograph of her baby boy and never cashed her last paycheck didn't leave voluntarily. And I think the man who showed up with her infant and claimed she abandoned him has been hiding something for 12 years. Find her, Hargrove. We will. Cole hung up and leaned against the hospital wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Down the hall, a baby cried. A nurse's shoes squeaked on the tile. The ordinary sounds of a place where people came to be fixed. He thought about Jesse Webb, 21 years old, working doubles at a diner to feed her baby, singing while she worked, and then one day gone, erased from the world as thoroughly as if she had never existed, except for a faded Polaroid and a 4-month-old boy who grew up believing she had chosen to leave. The cruelest part wasn't what Fenner had done to Jesse. The cruelest part was what he had told Marcus, that his mother had abandoned him, that nobody wanted him, that he was the kind of person people left behind. 12 years of that lie, every day, every night. A poison dripped into a child's ear until it became the foundation of everything he believed about himself and the world. And yet that child had walked into a biker clubhouse and asked for work, had swept a garage floor like his life depended on it, had sorted bolts with the precision of a surgeon, had learned to read engines the way musicians read notes, had looked grown men in the eye and never once asked for pity. The resilience of children is not a miracle. It is an accusation. It is the world's evidence against itself, proof that we demand of the smallest and most vulnerable among us a strength we would never expect from ourselves. Cole wiped his face with the back of his hand and went back into the room. Marcus was asleep, the pain medication finally pulling him under. Grizzly still held his hand. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The IV dripped. "I'm staying tonight," Grizzly said. "I know. Nobody's coming through that door that I don't approve of." "I know that too." Cole put his hand on Grizzly's shoulder. "We're going to get him through this." "Damn right we are." At 2 in the morning, Boone pulled into the hospital parking lot on his Harley and parked under a streetlight where he could see the entrance. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He sat on his bike in the cold October air, arms crossed, red beard tucked into his collar, and he watched the door. At 4, Witt arrived to relieve him. At 6, Dawson took the next shift. No one asked them to come. No one organized a schedule. They just showed up. The way men show up when something matters enough to override every excuse for staying home. By morning, the hallway outside Marcus's room had a constant presence of leather and quiet watchfulness that the hospital staff quickly learned to appreciate rather than question. Because whatever these men looked like from the outside, whatever the town had always whispered about them in that hallway on that night, they were exactly what a broken boy needed. Sentinels, standing guard over someone the system had failed, making sure with their presence and their silence and their unshakable resolve that the failure stopped here. That morning, Detective Hargrove executed the arrest warrant. He found Dale Fenner at the Blue House on Maple Street at 7:15 and sitting in the kitchen in his undershirt, coffee going cold, a half-empty bottle of bourbon on the counter beside him. Fenner saw the badge and the uniformed officers behind Hargrove and started shouting before anyone spoke. "This is about that kid, isn't it? That lying little—" "Dale Fenner, you are under arrest for aggravated child abuse. You have the right to remain silent." "This is bull. He's a foster kid. They're all liars. Every one of them." Hargrove didn't respond. He let the uniforms do their work, cuffs and Miranda in the backseat of a cruiser. But before they led Fenner out, Hargrove stopped him in the doorway. "We're also reopening the investigation into the disappearance of Jessica Marie Webb. You're going to want a lawyer for that conversation, Mr. Fenner." For the first time, the bluster left Dale Fenner's face. Something else replaced it. something that looked very much like the recognition of a man who had been running for 12 years and had just felt the ground give way beneath his feet. They put him in the cruiser. The door closed. The engine started. And the blue house on Maple Street sat empty for the first time in years, its curtains still half drawn, its porch still sagging, its secrets not yet fully surrendered. But soon, very soon. Back at the hospital, Marcus woke to find Grizzly still beside him, a cup of coffee from the vending machine in his giant hand, morning light streaming through the window. What time is it? 7:30. How do you feel? Sore but better? Good, because we've got somewhere to be this morning. Where Grizzly set down his coffee, he looked at the boy in the hospital bed, this child who had endured more in 12 years than most people face in a lifetime, and he chose his words with the same care Wit used when handling a precision instrument. The courthouse. There's a hearing this morning. A judge is going to look at everything that happened to you, everything we documented, everything the detective found, and she's going to ask you some questions. Marcus's face tightened. The old fear, the old reflex. What kind of questions? About where you've been, what's been done to you, and where you want to go. Where I want to go? Yeah, Marcus. For the first time in your life, someone with the power to do something about it is going to ask you what you want. And whatever you say will be right there with you. Marcus stared at the ceiling for a long time. The monitor beeped. The IV dripped. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past. Do I have a choice? He asked, the same question he'd asked weeks ago. But this time the voice was different. This time there was something in it that hadn't been there before. Not hope exactly, but the space where hope might grow if given half a chance. Yeah, kid, Grizzly said. You do. Marcus nodded, slowly, like a man stepping onto solid ground after years of walking on ice. Okay, he said. Let's go. Grizzly helped him out of the hospital bed, careful of the rib wrap, careful of every wince and intake of breath. They signed discharge papers while Dr. Sinclair stood at the nurse's station and watched them go with an expression that was equal parts professional concern and something she rarely allowed herself to feel in a job that showed her the worst of humanity every day. Lorraine was waiting in the parking lot with her Buick engine running heat on. She'd been up since 4 ironing a button-down shirt she'd bought at the thrift store on her way to the hospital. Size boys medium, navy blue. She handed it through the window along with a pair of clean khaki pants and a belt. For court, she said. Marcus stared at the clothes the way he had stared at the sandwich that first day. Like they might be taken away at any second. You bought these for me. I did. Now get changed. We're on a schedule. In the hospital restroom, Marcus put on the shirt. His fingers fumbled with the buttons because his ribs protested every movement of his arms, but he did it himself slowly, methodically, the same way he did everything. When he looked in the mirror, a boy he didn't recognize stared back. A boy in a clean shirt. A boy who looked like he belonged somewhere. He touched the collar with his fingertips. Then he tucked the shirt in, adjusted the belt, and walked out. Grizzly was waiting. He looked at the boy and something caught in his chest, a feeling so sharp and so sudden that he had to turn away for a second and pretend to check his phone. You clean up good, kid. Thanks. Ready? No, but let's go anyway. The Harlan Falls County Courthouse was a 2-story brick building on Main Street, built in 1923, with tall windows that let in long columns of morning light and wooden benches worn smooth by a century of people waiting for justice. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old wood and the particular brand of institutional coffee that tastes the same in every government building in America. Marcus walked through the front doors between Grizzly and Cole, and the first thing he saw was the rest of the club filling the back rows of the courtroom. Boone in a clean shirt, red beard trimmed. Wit, with his salt and pepper hair combed back, grease scrubbed from his hands for possibly the first time in years. Dawson. 3 other members whose names Marcus had only recently learned, but whose faces had become familiar over weeks of quiet acknowledgement in the garage. Lorraine seated behind them, clutching her purse with both hands. They were all there. Every one of them. Not because someone had called a meeting or issued an order, because a boy who had asked for work instead of pity was about to face the most important moment of his life, and they would not let him face it alone. Marcus stopped in the aisle. He looked at them, row after row of leather and scars and hard-lived years. And for the first time, the mask he had worn for 12 years cracked in public. Not much, just a trembling of the jaw, a brightness in the eyes, but Grizzly saw it, and he put his hand on the boy's shoulder and guided him to the front table. Judge Elaine Whitmore entered the courtroom at 9 sharp. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, 63 years old, with the bearing of a woman who had spent decades watching the legal system process human pain and had long since lost patience with anyone who treated that process as a game. She had seen too many children pass through her courtroom in varying states of damage, and she had learned that the measure of a society was not how it treated its strongest members, but how it protected its weakest. She opened the file on her bench and read in silence for several minutes while the courtroom waited. Then she looked up. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by Detective Hargrove and CPS Representative Miranda Finch. Before we proceed, I want to address the respondent." She looked at the empty chair where Dale Fenner's court-appointed lawyer sat alone. "Where is Mr. Fenner?" "In custody, Your Honor. Arrested this morning on charges of aggravated child abuse." "Noted. We'll proceed without him for the purposes of this emergency custody hearing." Miranda Finch, the CPS representative who had been assigned after Hargrove escalated the case, stood and presented the evidence. She was methodical, thorough, and visibly angry beneath her professional composure. She laid out the medical records from the hospital, the photographs Cole had taken over the previous weeks, the school records showing repeated absences and documented injuries that had been attributed to accidents but never investigated. The pattern of Fenner moving across 5 counties each time, leaving behind a trail of injured children and closed cases. She presented Grizzly's notebook with its careful dates and times. She presented Lorraine's file on Jesse Webb and the Polaroid photograph. She presented teacher statements that had been quietly collected over the past week, educators who had seen the signs and reported them through channels that went nowhere, and who were now putting their observations on the record with the fury of people who had been failed by the very systems they relied upon. The evidence took 45 minutes to present. When it was done, the courtroom was silent in the particular way that courtrooms go silent when the truth has been laid out so completely that no one can pretend it isn't there. Judge Whitmore turned to Marcus. "Marcus Webb," she said, and her voice was gentle in a way that surprised everyone who had only seen her judicial demeanor. "You've heard everything presented today. I want you to know that you are safe in this room. No one here will hurt you. No one here will punish you for telling the truth. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "I'd like to ask you some questions. You don't have to answer anything you're not comfortable with, but anything you say will help me make the best decision for your future. Is that all right?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you feel safe in Mr. Fenner's home?" Marcus shook his head. "No." "Can you tell me about that?" The courtroom held its breath. In the back row, Boone's massive hands gripped the bench in front of him so hard the wood creaked. Witt stared at the floor. Lorraine pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Marcus's voice started small, quiet. The voice of someone who had been told for 12 years that speaking the truth would make everything worse. But as he spoke, something happened. The words gained weight, gained momentum, gained the particular power that truth carries when it has been locked away for too long and is finally allowed to breathe. "He hits me when he's drunk, when he's angry, when I don't do something right, sometimes when I haven't done anything wrong at all. He hits me with his hands, with his belt, once with a boot. He kicked me 2 nights ago because I dropped a glass. That's how my ribs got broken." He paused, swallowed, continued. "He doesn't feed me most days. There's food in the house, but it's his food, and if I take any without asking, he hits me harder. The sandwiches Lorraine packed were the only real meals I got most weeks. He locks me in my room at night. There's a padlock on the outside. I sleep on a mattress on the floor. There's no sheets. The window is boarded up." The courtroom was absolutely still. Even the court reporter's fingers had paused over her keys. "He told me my mother left me, that she saw me and didn't want me, that I was the kind of kid nobody would ever want. He said if I told anyone what happened in that house, they'd put me in a place worse than anything he could do to me." And I believed him. His voice broke on the last word, but he didn't cry. He straightened in his chair, and his hands, which had been trembling, went still. "I believed him until 3 weeks ago, when I walked into the Black Ridge Riders clubhouse and asked for a job. And those men Those men right there, they gave me one. They didn't have to. They didn't know me. They had no reason to care. But they looked at me and they saw me, not a foster kid, not a problem, not a file number. Me. And they treated me like I was worth something. He turned and looked at the row of bikers. At Grizzly, at Cole, at Witt and Boone and Lorraine. Every face in that row was struggling to hold composure. Grizzly's eyes were red. Cole's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. "I've been in 4 placements since I was a baby," Marcus said, turning back to the judge. "Nobody ever asked me what I wanted. Nobody ever gave me a choice. They moved me around like I was a piece of furniture that didn't fit anywhere. And the whole time, the one person who was supposed to be taking care of me was the person hurting me." He took a breath, steady, measured. "So if you're asking me where I want to live with them, with the Black Ridge Riders, with Grizzly and Cole and Witt and all of them, because they're the first people in my whole life who made me feel like I had a right to be here." Judge Whitmore's pen had stopped moving. She looked at Marcus for a long moment, then at the row of men behind him. She had presided over cases involving motorcycle clubs before. She had seen men in leather vests in her courtroom, usually as defendants, occasionally as witnesses, rarely as anything resembling a positive influence. But she also knew from 30 years on the bench that the truth does not always come in the packaging you expect. And the truth in this courtroom on this morning was that a group of men the town had spent years judging by their appearance had done more for one child in 3 weeks than every institution in the county had managed in 12 years. "Mr. Mancini," she said, "please approach." Grizzly stood. His boots were heavy on the tile. He approached the bench and stood with his hands at his sides, white beard against the collar of his button-down eyes steady. "You've heard Marcus's statement. You understand the responsibilities involved in temporary guardianship of a minor." "Yes, Your Honor." "Background checks, home study, and foster certification classes will be required. You will be subject to regular visits from CPS. The process is not quick, and it is not easy." "I understand. Are you prepared to provide a stable, safe, and nurturing home for this child?" Grizzly looked back at Marcus, at the boy in the navy blue shirt that Lorraine had bought at a thrift store at 4 in the morning, at the boy who had walked into a biker clubhouse and changed every life in it. "Your Honor, lost my daughter 11 years ago. Drunk driver. Since then, I've been looking for a reason to keep going. That boy gave me one. Every man in that row back there will tell you the same thing. We're not perfect. We're rough and loud, and we've made mistakes. But we will protect that child with everything we've got, every single day, for as long as he needs us, and beyond." The courtroom was silent. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. "Emergency temporary guardianship is granted to Joseph Mancini, effective immediately. Mr. Fenner is to have no contact with the child. CPS will conduct the required home study within 30 days. This court will reconvene in 90 days for a permanent custody determination." She paused, then she looked at Marcus one more time. "Marcus, the court wants you to know something. What happened to you was not your fault. It was never your fault. And you are exactly the kind of young man who deserves every good thing that comes next." Her gavel fell. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a door closing on 12 years of darkness. Marcus stood from his chair. His legs were shaking. His ribs ached under the wrap, but his eyes were clear. Grizzly was beside him in 2 steps. He didn't hug him, not yet, not with the fractured ribs. He just stood there, one hand on the boy's shoulder, solid as a mountain, and said, "Let's go home, kid." Behind them, the courtroom erupted in the restrained way that courtrooms erupt when emotions are too large for the space. Lorraine was crying. Boone was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand and pretending not to. Witt stood quietly nodding to himself the way he did when an engine he'd rebuilt turned over perfectly on the first trombone. In the hallway, Cole fell into step beside them. "Fenner's in custody. The charges will hold. And Hargrove says the search warrant for the 2013 property should come through by end of week." "The property?" Marcus asked. Cole and Grizzly exchanged a glance. They had not yet told Marcus about his mother's file, about the Polaroid, about the suspicion that Jesse Webb had not abandoned him but had been taken from him. "There are some things we need to talk about," Cole said. "Not today. Today is a good day. We're going to take today and let it be what it is." Marcus looked at him with those old, knowing eyes. It's about my mom, isn't it? Cole didn't lie. He had promised never to lie to this boy, and he intended to keep that promise even when the truth was heavier than he could carry. Yeah, it's about your mom. She dead? The hallway was silent. Lorraine's breath caught. Grizzly's hand tightened on Marcus's shoulder. We don't know yet, Cole said, but we're going to find out, I promise you that. Marcus nodded, the nod of someone who has been preparing for the worst his entire life and has learned that preparation doesn't make it hurt less, but it does keep you standing. Okay, he said, when you know, tell me, whatever it is, don't protect me from it. I've been protected from the truth my whole life, and all it did was make the truth worse when it finally came. Cole looked at this 12-year-old boy who spoke with the wisdom of someone who had lived 6 lifetimes, and he felt something he had not felt since leaving the Marines. The particular pride that comes from witnessing courage so pure and so unearned that it shames every adult in the room. You have my word, he said. They walked out of the courthouse into the October sunlight. The air was cold and clean, the sky impossibly blue, the kind of Montana morning that makes you believe the world is capable of beauty even after it has shown you its worst. Grizzly's Harley was parked at the curb. Marcus looked at it, then at Grizzly. Can I ride on the back? Grizzly smiled, the kind of smile that comes from a place so deep it surprises even the person wearing it. Not today. Ribs need to heal first, but soon. Promise. Promise. They climbed into Lorraine's Buick instead, Marcus in the back seat, Grizzly beside him, Cole in the front. As they pulled away from the courthouse, Marcus turned and looked back through the rear window. The bikers were filing out, mounting their machines, engines rumbling to life one by one. They formed a line behind the Buick, a column of chrome and leather that stretched back half a block. An escort, a convoy, a declaration to anyone watching that this boy belonged to them now, and anyone who wanted to hurt him would have to come through every single one of them first. Marcus watched them through the glass, and for the first time in 12 years, he let himself cry. Not the silent tears of pain that he had learned to hide, not the choked sobs of a child trying not to be heard through a locked bedroom door. Real tears. Full tears. The tears of someone who has been holding a weight so long that they forgot what their body felt like without it, and the sudden release is so overwhelming that it takes the form of water and salt and shaking shoulders and sounds that come from somewhere deeper than the throat. Grizzly didn't say anything. He just sat beside him, solid, present, there. And the convoy of motorcycles followed them all the way home. The clubhouse transformed in 48 hours. They cleared out an old storage room off the back hallway, a space that had been collecting dust-broken furniture and forgotten engine parts for the better part of a decade. Boone and Dawson hauled everything out in a single afternoon, filling the bed of Dawson's pickup twice over. Cole and Witt stripped the walls, patched the drywall where moisture had done its quiet damage, and painted the room a clean pale blue that Lorraine had chosen because she said it was the color of calm, and this boy deserved calm more than anyone she had ever met. Boone built a loft bed by hand, solid pine sanded smooth with a desk underneath and a ladder on the side. He spent 2 full days on it, measuring twice, cutting once, working with a care and attention that surprised everyone who had only ever seen him swing a wrench or throw a punch. When someone asked why he was taking so long on a kid's bed, he looked up from his sanding block with an expression that suggested the question was the stupidest thing he had ever heard. Because it needs to be right. Lorraine brought sheets, a warm comforter in deep blue, pillows 2 of them because she believed every child deserved the choice of sleeping with 1 or 2. She brought a small reading lamp and a stack of books she had selected with the instinct of a woman who understood that a boy who could sort engine parts with the precision of a jeweler might also be the kind of boy who needed stories. Someone donated a small television. Another member hung a pegboard on the wall opposite the bed tools already arranged on it, each a silhouette traced in marker, with a label across the top in stenciled letters, Marcus's stuff. Witt contributed a framed poster of a Harley-Davidson shovelhead engine, exploded view every component labeled. He hung it where Marcus would see it first thing every morning. They installed a real door, solid wood, not hollow core, with a deadbolt that locked from the inside. Grizzly had insisted on that detail, and no one questioned it, because they all understood what it meant for a boy who had spent years behind a padlock on the outside of his door to finally have a lock he controlled. A lock that said, "This space is yours. You decide who enters. You decide when." By Sunday evening, Marcus stood in the doorway of his room, backpack in hand, the only possessions he owned, staring at a space that could not have been more different from anything he had known. Clean walls, a real bed with real sheets, a desk with a lamp, tools with his name on them, a door that locked from his side. He didn't move for almost a full minute. "This is mine," he said, and his voice cracked on the second word in a way that broke every heart within earshot. "All yours," Grizzly said from behind him. "Nobody takes it away. Nobody locks you in. If you want to be alone, you close that door and it stays closed until you're ready to open it." Marcus set his backpack on the desk, ran his fingers across the surface, touched the comforter on the bed, pressing his palm into it as if testing whether it was real. Walked to the pegboard and looked at each tool, his eyes moving from wrench to wrench with the reverence of someone visiting a museum. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and put his face in his hands. Grizzly waited. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He stood in the doorway like a cathedral pillar, solid, patient, permanent, and he let Marcus have the moment. When the boy looked up, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. "Thank you. You earned it, kid. Every bit of it." That evening, the entire club gathered in the main room. The jukebox was playing low. Someone had ordered pizza. Lorraine had baked a chocolate cake from scratch with frosting an inch thick. The room smelled of coffee and leather and the particular warmth that comes from too many people in a space designed for fewer. Cole stood at the bar. He raised a bottle of root beer toward Marcus. Everyone else held beer except Lorraine, who held coffee, and Whit, who held a glass of water because he hadn't touched alcohol in 22 years and never would again. "To Marcus Webb," Cole said, and the room went quiet. "The kid who walked through our door asking for work instead of a handout. You've got more courage than most men I've known in my entire life. You didn't ask for pity. You didn't ask for charity. You asked for a chance to earn your place. And you earned it every day, every shit, every floor you swept, and every bolt you sorted, and every question you asked Whit that he was too stubborn to admit he didn't know the answer to." Laughter. Whit shook his head but smiled. "You've got a family now, Marcus. Messy, loud, rough around every edge. But we've got your back. Always, every one of us. To family." "To family?" The room echoed and the sound filled the clubhouse like something physical, like warmth, like shelter, like the closing of a door that had been open to the cold for far too long. Marcus tried to speak, opened his mouth, closed it. The emotion was bigger than language, bigger than anything he had tools to express. And so he just nodded, tears falling freely, and for once he didn't wipe them away or turn his head or pretend they weren't there. Boone reached over and ruffled his hair so hard Marcus nearly fell off his stool, and the laughter that followed was the real kind, the kind that starts deep and spreads through a room and leaves everyone lighter. Later that night, Grizzly found Marcus sitting on the front steps of the clubhouse, chin on his knees, staring up at a sky packed with more stars than he'd ever seen from Maple Street, where the porch light never came on and the street lights were always broken. "You good?" Marcus thought about it, not the reflexive answer, not the automatic find that served as armor. He actually considered the question, turning it over in his mind the way he turned bolts in his fingers, examining it from every angle. "Yeah," he said. "For the first time, yeah." He leaned his head against Grizzly's massive shoulder. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. "Will we ever find out what happened to my mom?" "We're already looking, kid. Detectives are on it. If there's an answer, Hargrove will find it." "What if the answer is bad?" Grizzly didn't sugarcoat it. "Then we face it together. Whatever the truth is, you won't face it alone." Marcus nodded against his shoulder. "I never had this before. Someone just sitting with me, not wanting anything, not waiting to yell or grab or punish, just being here." Grizzly's arm tightened around the boy. He thought about all the years this child had spent in rooms where presence meant danger, where the sound of someone nearby was a reason to hold your breath instead of lean in. "Get used to it," Grizzly said. Inside, Marcus's homework was pinned to the clubhouse corkboard next to ride schedules and maintenance logs. His first careful sketches of motorcycle engines, drawn in pencil with precise detail, were taped to the refrigerator. In the garage, his blue toolbox sat on the workbench, his name stenciled on the side. He was home. 3 weeks passed. Marcus healed. The rib wrap came off. The bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing, and for the first time in years, his skin was unmarked. He ate 3 meals a day. He gained weight. The hollow sharpness of his cheekbones softened. His eyes, which had always carried the flat, guarded look of someone expecting the next blow, began to change. Not all at once, not completely, but day by day the way ice melts in spring so slowly you don't see it until suddenly the river is flowing again. The counselor's office was in a small brick building on 2nd Street, and Marcus went every Wednesday at 4. Her name was Dr. Patricia Calloway, a woman in her mid-50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that reminded Marcus of warm water. She didn't push, she didn't probe. She let him talk about engines for the first 3 sessions because she understood that a boy who had never been allowed to speak freely needed to practice with safe subjects before he could approach the dangerous ones. In the 4th session, he told her about the padlock on his bedroom door. In the 5th, he told her about the nights when Dale's footsteps stopped outside his room, and the lock turned, and the door opened, and the only thing Marcus could do was make himself as small as possible and wait for it to be over. In the 6th, he told her about his mother, about the arms he remembered, about the voice, about how he'd spent 12 years believing she'd left him because believing she was dead was worse, and now that he knew the truth, he didn't know which was heavier, the lie or the reality. Doctor Calloway told him something that stayed with him. She said grief is not a weight you carry, it's a room you live in, and over time you don't leave the room. You just build more rooms around it. Rooms for joy and work and love and purpose. The grief room stays, but it becomes one room among many instead of the only room you know. Marcus thought about that for a long time, and then he went back to the garage and built a shelf for his toolbox because building things was the only language he had for emotions that were too large for words. He went to school. His grades improved immediately. His math teacher reported Marcus was 2 years ahead of his level. His science teacher said he asked questions college students didn't think to ask. His English teacher noted that he wrote about machines the way poets wrote about love, with precision and reverence, and an understanding that beauty was inseparable from how a thing worked. At the clubhouse, Witt continued his education. Compression ratios, valve timing, the physics of combustion. Marcus absorbed everything the way a dry field absorbs rain. You could be an engineer, Witt told him one Saturday, a real one, degree in everything. You think, I don't think, I know, you've got the mind for it. All you need is the runway. Marcus smiled, the real kind, the kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. I'm going to build something someday. Something that matters. You already are, kid. Meanwhile, Hargrove's investigation into Jesse Webb had moved from suspicion to evidence. The search warrant for the property Dale Fenner had rented in 2013 was granted on a cold November morning. The property, a small house on the outskirts of Gallaudet County, had been demolished 4 years prior to make way for a storage facility that was never built. The lot sat empty, overgrown with weeds, the foundation still visible beneath the dirt like bones beneath skin. Hargrove assembled a forensic team, ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, the particular professional patience that distinguishes people who search for the dead from people who investigate the living. Cole was there. Not officially. He stood across the road, arms crossed, watching. Grizzly had wanted to come, but Cole told him to stay with Marcus. Some things the boy didn't need to see even from a distance. The cadaver dog alerted on a spot 12 feet from where the back porch had been. The radar confirmed an anomaly 4 feet below the surface. They dug carefully, slowly, the way archaeologists dig when they know what they're going to find and wish they didn't. At 4 feet and 3 inches, they found her. Jessica Marie Webb, 21 years old, mother of one, waitress at Lorraine's Diner, the woman who sang while she worked, the woman who held her baby like she was never going to let go. She had been wrapped in a blue tarp and placed in a shallow grave, with no marker, no ceremony, no acknowledgement that a human being had been put into the earth. The forensic pathologist would determine blunt force trauma to the skull as the cause of death. A single devastating blow. 12 years she had been there, while her son grew up in the house of her killer. While the system processed paperwork and closed cases and moved on. While an entire town looked at a blue house on Maple Street and chose not to see what was happening inside. Hargrove called Cole from the site. His voice was flat. the voice of a man who has run out of room for emotion and has packed everything into a box to be dealt with later. We found her. Cole closed his eyes. The November wind cut through his jacket. How blunt force trauma. Quick. Fenner. The DA is filing murder charges today. With the forensic evidence and the timeline, it's solid. He's not getting out. Cole drove back to Harlan Falls. The drive took 40 minutes on two-lane highways through Montana rangeland, and he used every minute to think about how to tell a 12-year-old boy that his mother had been murdered by the man who raised him. There was no right way. He knew that. He delivered death notifications in the Marines, standing on porches in dress blues, watching the light leave someone's eyes as the words left his mouth. He'd hated it every time. And every time the only thing that made it bearable was honesty. Not softened, not delayed, not dressed up in language designed to protect the speaker instead of the listener. Marcus deserved the truth, the whole truth, delivered by someone who would stay in the room after the words landed. He pulled into the clubhouse lot and sat in his truck for 5 minutes with the engine off, watching through the garage window. Marcus was inside, sitting at the workbench, sketching an engine design in a notebook Whit had given him. His pencil moved in confident strokes. His posture was straight. His face, visible in profile through the glass, was relaxed in a way Cole had never seen it before. The face of a boy who was beginning slowly to believe that the world might contain more than just pain. Cole got out of the truck and walked inside. Marcus looked up, and something in Cole's face told him everything before a word was spoken. "You found her," Marcus said. "Yeah, kid. We found her." Marcus set the pencil down, carefully, aligned it with the edge of the notebook. "She's dead." "Yes." "He killed her." "Yes." Marcus nodded once. The nod of someone who has been carrying a truth they couldn't prove for years, holding it in the part of themselves that knows things the mind hasn't caught up with yet. "I knew," he said quietly. "I always knew. She wouldn't have left me. Not her. I could feel it my whole life, even when he told me otherwise." Cole sat on the stool beside him, not facing him, facing the workbench, the way men sit when the conversation is too important for eye contact. "She didn't leave you, Marcus. She never left you. She had filed a complaint against Fenner 2 weeks before she disappeared. She was planning to take you and run." He stopped her. "Because of me?" "No." Cole's voice carried a force that made Marcus look up. "Not because of you, because of him. Because he was a violent man who couldn't accept that a woman he wanted to control had the courage to walk away. Your mother died trying to give you a life he couldn't poison. And the fact that he got 12 years of poisoning it anyway is a failure that belongs to every adult who looked the other way. Not to you, never to you." Marcus pressed his hands flat against the workbench, steadying himself the way he steadied engine parts. "Where is she?" "The medical examiner's office. When she's released, we can give her a proper burial. Whatever you want." Marcus was silent for a long time. Then in the margin of his notebook page, he wrote 2 words in small, careful letters for Mom. He went back to drawing. And Cole sat beside him in silence, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone in pain is simply stay. That night, Grizzly heard the boy crying through the wall that separated their rooms. Quiet, muffled sobs that lasted almost an hour. He stood outside Marcus's door with his hand raised, ready to knock. But the door was locked from the inside, and that lock meant something. It meant Marcus had the right to grieve in private, on his own terms, in his own way. Grizzly lowered his hand. He sat on the floor outside the door, instead, his back against the wall, and he stayed there until the crying stopped, and the silence that followed felt like sleep rather than surrender. In the morning, Marcus came out with red eyes and asked Lorraine for pancakes, and nobody mentioned the night before, because some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. In the weeks that followed, the DEA filed murder charges against Dale Fenner. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. DNA, soil analysis, the timeline that placed Fenner as the last person to see Jesse alive, the restraining order she had filed 2 weeks before her death, the testimony of a neighbor from 2013 who remembered hearing an argument late one night and then never seeing the young woman again. Fenner, facing life without parole on the murder charge, plus multiple counts of aggravated child abuse across 5 counties, eventually pleaded guilty in a deal that spared Marcus from having to testify at trial. Cole had insisted on that. The boy had already given enough testimony for 1 lifetime. The plea was entered on a Tuesday morning. Fenner received 45 years to life. He was 51 years old. He would die in prison. Marcus learned about the sentence from Grizzly, who told him that evening in the garage. "It's over," Grizzly said. Marcus nodded once. "Good." He picked up a wrench and went back to work, and Grizzly understood that this was Marcus's way of processing things too large for words. He worked with his hands because his hands always knew what to do, even when the rest of him didn't. The funeral was held on a Saturday in late November. The church in Harlan Falls was small, white-clapboard, with a steeple that had been repainted every 5 years for a century. Lorraine had organized everything because she had carried the guilt of Jesse Webb's disappearance for 12 years, and this was the only way she knew to begin setting it down. The casket was simple pine, white wildflowers on top chosen by Marcus because Lorraine had told him Jesse used to pick wildflowers from the field behind the diner and put them in a coffee cup on the counter. The church was full, not just the Black Ridge Riders in the first 4 rows, but people from the town, teachers who had taught Marcus and wished they'd done more. The school nurse who had documented injuries labeled as accidents, shopkeepers who had seen the boy in the oversized hoodie and felt a prick of something they'd chosen to ignore. They came because the truth about Jesse Webb and Dale Fenner had spread through Harlan Falls, and it forced every person to ask the question comfortable people spend their lives avoiding. What did I know, and when did I choose not to know it? Marcus sat in the front pew between Grizzly and Cole. He wore the navy blue shirt Lorraine had bought him. His hands were folded in his lap. He did not cry during the service. He held himself with a composure that would have been remarkable in a man of 40 and was almost unbearable in a boy of 12. When the service ended, they drove to the cemetery on the hill. The plot was beneath an old oak tree bare in November, but the kind that would be magnificent in summer. Lorraine had chosen it because Jesse deserved shade after 12 years in the dark. The bikers carried the casket, Grizzly and Cole at the front, Boone and Witt behind, Dawson and 2 others at the rear. They walked in step boots on frozen grass, breath clouding the air, and the weight they carried was not just pine and hardware, but 12 years of failure and the fierce promise that it ended here. They lowered the casket. The pastor said his words. And then everyone stepped back because they understood without being told that this moment belonged to Marcus. He walked to the edge of the grave. In his hand was a single item, the Polaroid photograph from Lorraine's file. Jesse Webb, 21, holding her infant son, smiling with the radiance of someone who had found the one thing worth living for. On the back in faded ink, Marcus, 4 months. My whole heart. Marcus looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at the casket, and when he spoke, his voice was small but steady, carrying across the silent cemetery with the clarity of a bell. You didn't leave me. I know that now. You never left me. You tried to save me, and he stopped you, and then he spent 12 years telling me you didn't want me. But I remember your arms. I remember your voice. And I knew. Even when I didn't know, I knew I knew. He paused. The cold air burned his lungs. I'm okay now. I have people who see me, who take care of me, who taught me I'm worth something. I think you'd like them. They're loud, and they ride motorcycles, and they look scary, but they're good. They're really good. He knelt and placed the Polaroid on top of the casket, propping it against the wildflowers so Jesse's face looked up at the gray November sky. I'm going to build something someday, Mom. Something that matters. And every time I build something, I'll think of you. Because you're the one who held me first. And people who hold you like that don't leave. He stood, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, turned and walked back to where Grizzly was waiting. Grizzly put his arm around him and held him, and Marcus leaned into him the way a tree leans into the earth that holds its roots. They stood like that while the November wind moved through the bare branches of the oak. Behind them, Cole stood with his hands at his sides, scar visible against the gray sky. He thought about the boy who had pushed open the door of a biker clubhouse and asked for honest work. About the chain of events that single act of courage had set in motion. About how one desperate, brave 12-year-old walking through a door had exposed a murderer, freed a child, solved a 12-year-old disappearance, and given a room full of broken men the one thing they had all stopped believing they deserved. A second chance. Witt stood beside his hands in his jacket pockets, watching Marcus at the graveside with an expression that had nothing to do with engines or tools and everything to do with the particular agony of watching someone you've grown to love carry a weight no child should ever have to lift. He's going to be okay. Whit said quietly. Yeah, Cole replied. He is. Because of us. Because of him. We just opened it out the door. He's the one who walked through it. The weeks that followed the funeral moved with a different rhythm. The urgency was gone. The crisis had passed. What remained was the slower, harder, more important work of building a life from the materials of a shattered one. Grizzly completed his foster certification classes. He drove to the county seat twice a week for 8 weeks, sitting in folding chairs in government conference rooms with other prospective foster parents taking notes in the same small notebook he'd once used to document Marcus's bruises. The other people in the class were younger, married, conventional. They looked at the enormous man in the leather vest with his white beard and his scarred hands, and they didn't know what to make of him. Until the instructor asked each participant why they wanted to foster. Grizzly stood. He told them about Lily, about losing her, about the years of emptiness, and about a boy who walked into a room full of strangers and asked for a chance. By the time he finished, 3 people in the room were crying. The instructor approved his application the same day. The home study was conducted by Miranda Finch herself, who arrived at the clubhouse expecting to find violations, and instead found a clean, well-maintained room with a lock on the inside, a stock kitchen, a garage where a boy was being taught a trade by men who treated him with more respect and attention than any classroom she had ever observed. This is unconventional, she said to Grizzly. Most good things are. She signed the approval without further comment. In December, Judge Whitmore convened the 90-day review hearing. Marcus sat at the same front table in the same navy blue shirt, which Lorraine had replaced with a new one because the boy had grown 1.5 inches in 3 months. The same rows of bikers filled the courtroom behind him. Miranda Finch presented her report. School grades dramatically improved. Physical health, normal weight, no injuries, regular medical and dental checkups for the first time in his life. Emotional health and counseling, making progress showing age-appropriate social development. Home environment stable, supportive, unconventional, but effective. Judge Whitmore read the report. She looked at Marcus. How are you, Marcus? I'm good, Your Honor. Do you feel safe? Yes, ma'am. Are you happy? Marcus paused. He turned and looked at Grizzly, at Cole, at the rows of leather and scars and hard-lived years that had become his family. Yeah, he said, I am. The judge nodded. This court grants permanent guardianship of Marcus Webb to Joseph Mancini. The arrangement is to be reviewed annually, but based on everything this court has seen, I have every confidence that Marcus has found exactly where he belongs. Her gavel fell, and this time the sound didn't echo like the closing of a door. It rang like the opening of one. In the hallway afterward, Marcus stood surrounded by the men who had become his family. Boone was arguing with Dawson about who would teach Marcus to ride first. Whit was describing the motorcycle Marcus would eventually rebuild with his own hands, a project that would take years and teach him everything he needed to know. Lorraine was already planning a Christmas dinner at the clubhouse that would require 2 turkeys and a table extension. Grizzly stood apart for a moment watching. Cole joined him. You did good, brother. We all did. No, you did. You showed up that first night and walked him home. You sat in that hospital chair. You held his hand. That was you. Grizzly shook his head. He showed up first. He walked through that door. Everything that came after was just the world finally doing what it should have done 12 years ago. They watched Marcus in the center of the group laughing at something Boone had said, his face open and unguarded in a way that would have been unimaginable 3 months earlier. The mask was gone, not permanently. There would be days when it came back, days when the old fear surfaced and the old habits took over, and the 12 years of damage demanded their due. There would be nightmares and setbacks and moments when Marcus would test the people around him to see if they would stay. They would stay. Every time. Without exception. Without hesitation. Because that is what family does. Not the family you're assigned by birth or bureaucracy, but the family you build from choice and courage and the stubborn refusal to let someone you love face the dark alone. On Christmas morning, Marcus woke in his room at the clubhouse. Blue walls, warm comforter, tools on the pegboard, door locked from the inside, his choice, his control. Through the window, snow was falling on Harlan Falls, covering the gravel lot and the chrome motorcycles in soft white. He got up and opened the door. The smell of coffee and bacon hit him, and Lorraine's voice carried from the kitchen, singing something off-key that might have been a carol or might have been a country song. In the main room, a Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments that included socket wrenches, miniature motorcycles, and a hand-painted star that Boone had made from a flattened beer can and was inexplicably proud of. Under the tree was a single gift wrapped in brown paper with Marcus's name on it. He opened it carefully the way he did everything. Inside was a leather-bound journal, good quality, with thick cream-colored pages. On the first page in Cole's handwriting, for the things you want to build, for the things you want to remember, for the things you want to say to her when the words are ready. Marcus held the journal against his chest. He stood in the middle of the clubhouse on Christmas morning, 14 men and one woman watching him, snow falling outside, coffee brewing bacon, frying a crooked star on a tree, and he understood something that 12 years of survival had never taught him, that he belonged. Not because he had earned it, not because he had swept enough floors or sorted enough bolts or proven himself useful enough to justify the space he occupied. He belonged because these people had chosen him, and he had chosen them. And that mutual choosing, that deliberate, voluntary act of saying you matter to me, and I will show up for you, was the strongest foundation anything could be built on. Stronger than blood, stronger than paper, stronger than any system designed by people who had never stood in a doorway and wondered if they were allowed to exist. He opened the journal, picked up a pencil from the cup on the bar, and on the second page he began to draw. An engine, complex, detailed, every component in its place. Not a copy of anything Whit had shown him. Something new, something his. At the top of the page, he wrote engine number 1 for Mom. And at the bottom, in letters so small they were almost invisible, built by Marcus Webb, son of Jesse, brother of the Black Ridge Riders. Home. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The motorcycles in the lot disappeared under white blankets. The jukebox played. Lorraine burned the first batch of bacon and started over without complaint. Boone ate 3 plates of eggs. Whit read a motorcycle manual at the breakfast table. Cole sat in his corner booth with black coffee and watched the room with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has finally found the thing he didn't know he was looking for. And in his room off the back hallway behind a solid door, with a lock on the inside, a blue toolbox with his name on it sat on a desk next to a framed Polaroid of a young woman holding an infant, smiling at the camera with 2 words written on the back in faded ink. My heart, the heart she never abandoned, the heart that found its way home.